pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the regular agenda. Does anybody have any
So moved.
tweaks? Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's been a motion by Rick, seconded by Sean. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All right, the next item is the consent agenda. Any questions? Otherwise, I take a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, Sean made the motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rick.
Second.
Okay, Rick made the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. All right, next item is the public is invited to speak on matters not on the agenda, and the speakers are limited to 5 minutes. So I know we have one gentleman. Just state your name and your address, please.
My name's Gary Whitus. I live at 1406 9th Street, Southeast in New Prague. Been a resident here for 15 years. I don't always attend council meetings because you make it too easy now. I could just watch the stream live, and that's what I was doing 2 weeks ago tonight. During that meeting, there were accusations made about several members of our police department. Mr. Mayor, I think you stated several times that it would be looked into.
Yes,
My assumption was then no investigation had taken place at that point.
correct.
Okay, that's what I thought. Later in the meeting, when it went to the going around the room, I believe our chief was called on and he had a few things to comment on. At that time, Councilman Ryan asked the chief if the county or the state provides diversity training for the police officers. Excellent question and very appropriate for the time. Chief Applin responded that not only do they take diversity training, but they've exceeded the state's requirements. I believe that's what was said by the chief. At that time, Councilman Saylor said, and I quote, because I wrote it down, "Sounds like you might need to do more." Sounds like you need to do more. Almost as if he's already reached a judgment. I was very insulted by that. I would imagine our chief of police was very insulted by that comment, and I gotta believe members of our police department were very insulted by that comment. It's already hard enough to get people into the law enforcement business in this state right now, and when you have a member of the council making comments like that, it's absolutely uncalled for, and I believe, Councilman Saylor, you owe an apology to our police department and our chief of police. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda, or is there anybody else that wants to speak? Next item on our agenda is the city engineer projects update. Do we have anything, Matt?
Chris is online.
Okay.
I am here. You can hear me okay?
We can hear you. That's all we can do. We can't
Okay.
see you. There you are. Well, on
Okay,
some of the
guys.
screens.
Yeah, okay.
I don't
Okay,
think
so
this is-
the project update, I won't get into that too much here unless there are questions on it. The final item on here, I do have a change order in relation to. So on the 2023-24 for the HSIP projects, if there are any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to move into the next item here. So with that, on the Main Street TH19 reconstruction project, been off the agenda for a while, but it's back up. I do have a change order included in your packet today, and that would be for accepting the project, reducing the warranty on landscape plantings, and having a small deduction on that item. So the reason why that project has not been closed out is that there is a warranty period on landscape plantings that exceeds what the warranty is on the rest of the work. So the contract was held open for this time, and the contractor has agreed to a reduction in payment so we can reduce that warranty and get the project closed out. So with that, I do have a change order included in your packet today. just so we can get that all formally done. With this change order, there would be a reduction in payment to the contractor in the amount of $1,446. And it would also require the contractor to waive their rights to incentive payments on the project, which would have actually increased the price on the project. So with this change order, if approved, we would just move straight into closeout on the project, hopefully with a final payment in the next meeting or two.
Okay,
So if you have any questions for me,
Just a refresher on my part. I know we talked about this before, so are we just assuming the responsibility for it and to finish up the landscaping, or just to take responsibility for whatever needs to be done then?
yeah, the city would be taking ownership of the landscape plantings. They did do a run through last summer, and there were only a handful. If maybe Matt can chime in here too, but I think there's only a handful of plants that required replacement. They would have met the requirements for getting that incentive payment based on the number of plantings that did not make it the first winter. But yeah, at this point, the city was essentially taking ownership of all the plantings.
And then seeing that they're replacing them or growing them or whatever we need to do then.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So you'd have, with this reduction in payment, at least you have that money put towards it, I guess. But yes, it's all on the city now to maintain, replace, and do anything in the future on these plantings.
Okay, thank you. I make a motion to approve the change order as it's presented.
okay, there's been a motion by Bruce. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Maggie seconds it. Any other discussion or questions of the engineer? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. Anything else, Chris?
That should be it. I'll see you probably in 2 weeks here.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
This monitor.
Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. This monitor isn't on or something.
Was it on ever?
No.
No, it doesn't, so. I don't know if it's not plugged in or just not turned on or.
Give it a go. Turn that one off though.
If the twins were on or something.
No, that'd be night. No, Thursday, right?
Yeah.
There we go. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is, the MHFA Workforce Housing Program.
All right, I'll provide a brief overview here about the couple of topics, actually 3 different topics we'll be talking for here tonight. We have a developer that has proposed kind of a cooperative project with Marv Deutsch, who's a property owner of the lot south of Walgreens. If you remember back in 2020, we had a comp plan amendment and rezoning, and then some variances to approve what at the time was a 43-unit apartment building on that property. The developer that has come forward now at this point is Ebert Construction, and you would have seen the name in the memo in the packet. They are looking at a 54-unit apartment building. At Planning Commission on Wednesday night this week, we're actually going to be looking at a possible variance that they would apply for probably at the end of the month here. But the footprint of the building from what Mr. Deutsch had proposed, from the 43-unit building to the 54-unit building would be no different. It's just a matter of their units being a little smaller than what Marv had been looking at initially. As part of the due diligence from the developer in looking into making a project financially feasible and obviously provide a return on their investment, they asked about any local incentives that we could provide to them. We looked into, obviously, you know, if there's the option of TIF and tax abatement, and then if there are any other state programs. We talked with them about the Workforce Housing Development Program, which is from the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, and they have a deadline for the end of April for a program that would allow the city to apply for funds that could then help, we'll just say, basically bring the cost down for the development of the market rate apartments, not looking at subsidized apartments or low income. These would be market rate. And this would just help them provide a better return on investment for their going through and actually providing the housing units in town here. So we do qualify for that program as an outstate Minnesota city. Obviously, New Prague is exempted from the Met Council, and we're considered outstate, so that's why we qualify for this program. One of the ways that we would have to participate if we make an application for what is ultimately a forgivable deferred loan that obviously would benefit the developer is we would have to have a local match, and that's where the tax abatement comes into play here. And we do have Michaela Hewitt from Baker Tilly that I'll turn it over to in a minute here to provide a little background on tax abatement in general, and then specifically about the general ask that could help this project happen here in New Prague. Obviously, everybody in the council knows we have not had any larger scale apartments other than the Praha Village, which is obviously age restricted. We haven't had any, we'll just say market rate apartments of any size built since the early 1990s. So you see them popping up everywhere, and you know, there's a number of factors for that, but in order for developers to obviously have the project work for them, they have to have some financial incentive to do so, and this would help them make that financially feasible. As part of the application, if the city and the council were to agree to apply for the funds, as I said, we would have to provide, for every $2, we would have to provide $1 match, and that's what TIF can be used for, that match. So you'll note a draft resolution. We're not looking for any action on anything tonight, but a draft resolution that the council would have to approve, that we would submit with the application for the workforce housing program. We would intend to do that if you would like to move forward. Obviously, we would do that at the April 15th meeting, which basically would commit the city to that local match of whatever the final mix of funding we would be applying for from the state. So that gives hopefully a little background on the program. The workforce housing, basically, we have to provide local employment need for the housing units, and we've already got a letter of support from Mayo and a letter of support from the New Prague Area School District. We actually only need to have one for the program, but we have asked for that from our larger employers, and I expect to have probably 5 letters in total, including Chart, Scott Equipment, and the like. So I just want to note that as well. There is support from the employment or employer community as well in New Prague for some more market rate apartment units in town. Maybe with that, Michaela, I can turn it over to you on generally, you know, what tax abatement is for housing, and a little bit of detail on what we're looking at here specifically.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As Ken did a great introduction into kind of the purpose for the discussion tonight. I'll give you a little bit more information on tax abatement, what it is, and how the developer has requested it be used for this proposed project. Economic development tax abatement is really more of a tax rebate. It is a tool that communities use to provide additional cash flow savings to a project. In this case, with it being a tax abatement, it's really more of a rebate. The project as proposed is about a $12.7 million project. Preliminary estimates from the county have provided a taxable value of about $6.2 million. The tax abatement is generated by the city's share of the taxes on that new developmental increase. Current value is about $93,000 with the increased value of about $6.2 million. The city's share of the increased taxes would be provided as a tax rebate back to the developer. And economic development tax abatement is a tool that has a lot of flexibility in the structure of it, meaning that if you're familiar with tax increment financing, which you're capturing the incremental taxes from that new project and financing a portion of the TIF eligible expenses. With tax abatement, it's structured similarly, where you're essentially redirecting a portion of the increased taxes to repay the developer obligation. The $12.7 million project, as proposed by the developer, would be financed traditionally through private equity and debt. And the debt is limited based on the operating revenues and operating expenses of the project upon completion. And the developer did provide some preliminary tax or preliminary financials of the project, both with and without the tax abatement. And essentially, as Ken had said, is asking for the tax abatement assistance as a means of providing additional cash flow to the project to both support the debt coverage on the debt repayment, as well as provide additional cash flow for the equity repayment to the investors. In order to provide tax abatement, the city needs to make a finding that the benefits of the abatement equal or exceed the cost of the abatement, and that the abatement is in the public interest because it will either increase or preserve the tax base, provides employment opportunities, helps renew certain areas, provides access services, or finances or provides for public infrastructure. The use of tax abatement dollars is very flexible, and it's essentially can be used for improvements to private property, infrastructure improvements, or other public facilities within the city. So the way that it's being requested in this case would be an eligible use. It would require a finding by the city that the benefits of the abatement exceed the cost of it, meaning that there is increased tax or increased revenues generated by the new project. And the other point with the way that it's being requested is, again, as a rebate, it's reimbursement. There's no upfront financing request of the city. It would be, again, based on the actual taxes that are generated using that preliminary estimate of the $6.2 million of value. Is what has been used to generate the initial tax abatement estimates. If we're looking at the city's share only of those tax abatement revenues, we're estimating about $32,000 per year. Again, that's based on the incremental value of the $6.2 million. And in the preliminary memo that is in your packet, we illustrated both a 15 and a 20-year term of tax abatement, and that is assuming 100% of the city's share of taxes. That would provide a range of $485,000 for 15 years, up to $647,000 for 20 years. One thing to point out is, again, the purpose of tonight is simply to introduce the request, the concept of providing tax abatement, and to understand the council's desire for supporting this project. The actual amount, the recommended amount of tax abatement, the application to Minnesota Housing is $1 million. The match would be about $500,000. And in that scenario, it would take about 15 years to repay that. And of course, the actual abatement would be based on the actual abatement amounts would be based on the value that's created upon completion of the project should it proceed. And then the terms of the abatement assistance would be defined at a later term, subject to approval of the tax abatement. The reason why I bring that up is, initially looking at the developer's pro forma and doing a review of it, the annual tax abatement does provide additional cash flow to the project, does bolster the return to the developer, and supports the debt coverage for the private financing. However, additional review into the assumptions related to the operating income and the expenses would occur to confirm what the actual recommended abatement amount would be based on the need. Maybe the last thing I'll say before pausing for any questions is, again, if you're familiar with tax increment financing, where it is for specific types of development or specific areas of development, there's also the required but-for test, and that but for the use of tax increment financing would that project proceed. With tax abatement, there's not a but-for test. It's really more based on, does the project meet the public needs and public purpose? And are there eligible uses of the abatement? And this type of project, again, would fit within those qualifications and is really based on the kind of the financial need and the public purpose of that project. So with that, I would entertain any questions that you might have on the tool or the proposed tax abatement numbers.
So what's the difference between, what did we do with chart that time?
We did a tax abatement with chart. I believe, Michaela, you were actually involved with that one.
What's the difference here between that one and, because I know that there was some clawback because they didn't,
That was job creation.
job creation, it didn't meet one of the things, so.
So when a city provides assistance to a project or to a developer, the type of project and the amount of assistance will trigger if it's considered a business subsidy. With the chart project, if we're providing assistance greater than 150,000, it requires a public hearing, and then there are business subsidy requirements per the city's subsidy policy goals. Housing is an exemption from the business subsidy requirements. So in this case, you wouldn't necessarily have any of the clawbacks related to job creation or wage goals for this project. Although certainly whenever you're entering into an agreement with a developer on a proposed project, the terms of the agreement, can be negotiated. So while it's not considered a business subsidy, if there's other goals or public benefits that the city wants to achieve, those are all negotiated terms that can be included within it. So in this case, if the city did choose to participate in a tax abatement, it would require a public hearing. A public hearing to consider creation of the tax abatement, but not a separate and additional business subsidy component.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
What is the percentage of developers who get this kind of tax on projects? I'm just kind of curious.
It's a good question that, I would say in this case, tax abatement for housing is used. It's not probably as common as if generally if a project qualifies for a tax increment district, then it's either for affordable housing or to remove blight or to create jobs through an economic development district. So tax abatement really is, I keep going back to TIF because that's the more commonly used tool that communities use. But tax abatement provides more flexibility as far as structuring how much assistance is provided to the developer, what the gap is. The process for creation is simpler. And I think in this market, given that it's a workforce housing project, there's no reduced rents or affordability requirements. It really is based on trying to close a financial gap, and that's where I said there would be additional due diligence to really understand what the minimum amount that the developer needs to still create a project that would work and meet the city's objectives. The other issue that we're dealing with and seeing more of these requests is related to the market. The developers financing right now typically, there's still, even if a market rate project, there's still going to be a maximum amount of rent that can be charged based on the construction costs of the project. And so two variables that we see that are causing larger gaps in projects and making them infeasible without assistance is construction costs still being higher, and market rate, meaning that interest rates are higher than they used to be. And those are both of those factors are causing more gaps than we would have seen in this type of project, say 3 to 5 years ago. So given the nature of where we are in the economy between those two factors, and the city's desire for this type of project based on the components that have been presented, we are seeing a shift to, I can't give you a percentage, but we are seeing more projects that are requiring more assistance than used to be, and even in some cases more than even what the project would generate, which is why this housing fund program had been created last year as a way to try to provide additional funds to projects.
Well, there's no way to know that even without this, that project wouldn't go on. Because we've talked with the developer when he purchased it, and we allowed him to build a stub street and to our specs, and I think there was even plans drawn up. I think I saw some initial plans or something.
Yeah, for the 43 unit building, we pretty much had everything ready to go.
Right.
At that point now, the original developer still owns the property, and it's kind of a joint venture at this point. So he would not be the constructing entity. It would be, as I mentioned, Ebert Construction as the actual, entity taking on that risk and financing it and constructing it, and then ultimately, renting the units out, so.
Well, here's my concern, and I have been on record with it. I was thinking that when that first came out, I wanted to see bigger apartments that could bring single-family people in, and I think there were some people on the council that thought there should be a wide range of different units there. And that was at the 43, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but 10 or 12 of them were gonna be of this size, and 20 were this, and 20 were that. So there was a wide range and very diverse family unit that could utilize those spots. Now I see that we're going up to 56, and they're gonna be a lot smaller. So are we gonna start excluding, perhaps a single mom with 3 kids because it's 1,100 square feet less? Because we've added more units to this that can be rented out, and I see where it's good for the developer and, good for workforce, whatever, but.
Yep. So, no, very good question. I don't have an exact number of unit mix and what would be 2-bedroom versus studio. I can likely get those before April 15th if this looks like it's gonna move forward. I know in the developer and talking with them about the unit sizes, they felt that the units that Marv had proposed were just too large for what the market could bear. So that's why they thought with that same footprint, they can get, some more units that they think are more rentable. And they just have experience, obviously, in some other communities that they believe that those larger units would not rent as well, just from their experience in their other projects, so.
Okay, so then we go from a 43 unit to a 54 unit. Have we done a parking study and whatever else? Let's assume 2 cars per, because we've run into other projects here where
So
people are forced into the street to park, they're forced over into the Coburn's lot to park, walk over.
Yep, so we'll actually be talking about that more at our planning commission meeting on Wednesday, if you'll be there, Sean.
I will be there,
So
but-
we'll be looking at potentially a parking variance from, roughly 2 parking spaces per unit to about 1.75, I believe was the number. So not a huge difference.
No, but
But,
unless you're the .25 that can't find a parking spot and you have
Yep.
to walk across the street.
and that all goes into the unit mix again. So again, we're just introducing things here. We're not looking for any final decision, but, no, all good questions.
Don't you think this should go before the planning commission, before we approve the,
Well, and nothing's being approved tonight. We're kind of just introducing the idea.
but the work's gonna start, because you wanna have it ready for the 15th.
What we're trying to do is just get, if you have a desire to apply for the MHFA Workforce Housing Development Grant at this point. If there isn't, then I don't know if the project happens or not, but likely everything else wouldn't have to happen either.
So what's it gonna cost the taxpayers of New Prague over 15 years? I'm sorry.
So that becomes part of the discussion tonight, is if knowing that some sort of match has to go along, that match could be cash up front, the match could also be tax abatement. I know in the memo it talks 100%. We have control over how much tax, like we would tax 1%, like 1% of the tax share, 50%, 100%. That's really up to us at that point. And it really is just coming off of the future earnings. And so,
Right, but how many TIFs do we have going on right now that are costing the taxpayers money?
I think the only TIF we
We
have
had with
is with
Prague
Chart,
Village.
we have Praha
Praha.
Village,
I think Praha is the only one
that's still on the books.
that's still on the
Okay,
books.
the Chart project isn't,
Nope.
okay.
And I guess,
And what
and
happens,
I guess in terms of costing the taxpayers money, we are only paying out to Praha what we collect, what's collected above and beyond. If that project never would have happened, it's not like we're paying out money that we didn't have before.
right, and I'm not saying I'm against or for that, but I
Correct.
just wanna, I think, to be upfront, because,
And-
I've gone through this many times, and I'm still confused with Michaela laying it all out, because it's a complicated process, and
Yeah.
it wasn't your presentation, it's just enormous.
Yes,
To
yes.
get your hands around it.
Yep, so if you look at her memo on page 2, she has the chart that kind of lays out the estimated 100% share for the city would be roughly $32,000. And so if the city decided to go 100%, it's just how many years then would we opt to pay that out, and that would be the number that would get paid out. Obviously, if we'll say the city opted to do 50%, you'd be looking at half of that number, or if you change the number of years. And so it's just a matter of kind of just doing simple math once the city decides what would be interested if it is interested in
Right.
going forward.
Well, I guess it goes back to the fact that, you know, we're going down this trail of handing out money to developers that, for projects that we don't know that might not, that still might take effect, that still might be done without this project, without this extra money.
100%. I mean, I think we could say that about any project.
And
quite
I'm just
frankly.
thinking of things coming down in the future here with, you know, you talk about blight, I mean, it's only gonna be a few more years before that mill, people are gonna wanna tear that mill down and use this type of money for blight, and that's gonna be more TIF money, and we're still paying off several other projects. And eventually that starts hitting the budget, and it becomes money that should be coming into the coffers that isn't. And we want a $12 million police station, and we want second sheet of ice, and all this leads into,
See, but I think the counter argument could be, let's say we don't do this and they decide not to build the project. Now we don't have the units or tax money rolling in. If we opt to say 50% instead of 100, well, now we potentially get the units and we have more than we had rolling in before to help us out, and we're helping subsidize a little bit, and eventually that then comes off the books and we're getting all of it. But you have to weigh apartments having early 90s, we said was the last time, like, they haven't been getting done. And so at some point, if you see that there's a need for housing, maybe the city has to step in. I know when I was hired, and this is kind of going slightly a different direction, we talked about, well, how do we somehow bolster the commercial to help take the weight off a little bit? Well, part of doing commercial is providing housing. I know as we do these EDA visits, over and over and over again, we hear that we just can't find people. Well, how do we get the people here? And we've talked about it. I had to buy a house. It was I got extremely lucky that one happened to fall into my lap, basically. But how many other people have we heard from other businesses that have said, we just can't find housing for our people to work here when we try to hire them? And so is this an opportunity where the city can step in and say, okay, we can provide a little bit to help you kind of fund your project a little bit, as well as we get the benefit of getting the housing for future residents? I'm not saying do it 100%. I'm not saying doing zero, but there might be a mix in there that we can look at, that best of both worlds for everybody.
okay, so with a yes vote tonight, we're gonna, walk me through that, we're gonna,
Not looking for any vote tonight.
Okay.
What we would like is some direction to continue to work towards what could be a future or a future tax abatement in order to pass ultimately a resolution, which we would need to do at the April 15th meeting, to allow us to submit an application aiming for a certain dollar amount. That would be our match for that application.
and then at that time, we'd review the total project, and you'd have some of those answers.
So
filled
TIF,
with
the
parking.
actual tax abatement would come at a later date. If we knew we got the program funding from the state, then we would go through with the public hearing and, like Michaela said, the further due diligence on, you know, really digging into their financials and everything. Because we can get awarded the funding from the state, and if everything looks kind of funny at that point, you can still say, no, we're gonna walk from that. This just says, if we go forward and want to use that funding, we have to have a match. So there's still some more steps to go, but we do want to hear if you're comfortable with this, and if you are, what is that dollar amount potentially that you would be amenable to?
Because I think part of it is too, is, I mean, if we had, the whole council came back and said, no, we're just not interested, well, then we know to stop spending time on this. If you guys say, yes, we are interested, and we think that this may be kind of where we want to land, then it gives us something more concrete that we can work with.
Any of the housing stuff that's up in front of the legislature right now, would that interfere with this process, so we'd have to redo everything?
I think the
I mean,
interference
they're
would
gonna
come more
require
from,
that a certain amount of it goes to a HUD facility?
no, I mean, I think that would deal more with more back-end stuff of how much parking are we required to get out of them, or what sort of building facade. It'd be more of the actual building of the unit itself and not so much the funding, is my understanding. And I don't know if you've been following it at all, Michaela.
No, I think this is probably, this is already fun, this is already a program that the deadline for application is April 30th. So I think the biggest challenge is developers understanding how competitive this program is, and having this pledge, this resolution of support bolsters their application and their need. But I think the biggest issue is if it's going to be oversubscribed, if projects don't receive it or aren't awarded funding or in the amounts that they're requesting, what's going to be the fallback plan to that. And so I think that's where part of this is trying to find an amount that the council can accept being able to provide or pledge up to, knowing that if the project does receive an award, we know what that award amount is, then that's when the due diligence and the actual establishment of the tax abatement would take place. It may be just one thing to point out with tax abatement, the request of the city is only the city's share of taxes, so the county and the school are not being asked to participate in this tax abatement. So while the city's share from a percentage all the way up to, or from a reduced percentage all the way up to 100% would be pledged to the developer if you choose to proceed, the overlapping taxing jurisdictions are not being asked to participate, so still the average resident should see an overall benefit to this project, subject to, and of course, it's always hard to say the overall impacts, but we're not looking at abating 100% of the tax increase, which we're estimating approximately 83,000, just the city's share of it, which means that the other entities would still have the increased values, which is a benefit to the residents overall with the overlapping districts.
This is pretty consistent with what we've done for years. We see it more in the industrial park where we're providing incentives. The incentives are in a different way with the price of the land that we're selling and other things, but we go through the same but-for kind of scenario. What's the benefit of it? And then secondly, what is the community getting out of it? In the industrial park, we're pretty much focused on job creation and tax capacity growth. In that area. In this scenario, it's similar thought process, but we're really looking at, are we serving the needs of the community in the housing area? So, but the but-for test would still need to take place. So it's really nothing, as far as the construct of it, it's not anything different than we've done before in my mind. But I just want to clarify a couple of things. You mentioned $1 million. Is that assuming the 15-year scenario and roughly being $900-some thousand total then, or?
The anticipated amount that the developer would ask or request of MHFA is $1 million. The local match would be about $500,000, which would be roughly 15 years of tax abatement, assuming the $32,000 per year. So I think what we're looking at is, we had shared in the packet just to show kind of the maximum tax abatements, assuming 100% of city participation for both 15 years and 20 years, because those are the maximum abatement terms that a city can do, 15 years with all three entities and up to 20 years if one of the other taxing entities declines participation. So we simply wanted to illustrate what the maximum tax abatement amount could be. But I think, the maximum that we would be initially looking at would be the 15 years or the just under 500,000, with the anticipation that number, with additional due diligence review of their cash flow assumptions, knowing that the structure of their financing is not based on, this is cash flow savings. It's not an additional financing that they would be relying on this revenue stream. And that kind of gets into the minutia of the financing itself, but it does also allow some flexibility in what the recommended and actual amount would be that they would need. So I think in reality, what we'd be looking at is up to 15 years based on the current tax amounts, with the idea that that could be reduced with their actual finances and what the actual award would be should they get funded through the state.
And just so I'm understanding it right, if we're looking at your assumptions on that tax rate, if the tax rate goes up, then that dollar amount is locked in, and then we're getting the taxes above that percentage?
That would be structured, so, right, the question is, as future values change, tax rates change, I think you could have in your agreement that if it were silent, essentially every year tax abatement is calculated based on whatever the value is multiplied by the tax rate, and then multiplied by the current year tax capacity rate of the city. So each year that could change, but you could certainly have in the agreement, if values go up, do you pay them off sooner? Or do you cap it, do you cap it based on if rates go up or values go up? They only get a flat amount, or do you allow them to be paid off and you would pay off the obligation sooner? So those are all, that's, the benefit of tax abatement is you have a lot of flexibility in how you want to structure it. And you can also, we said, what's common to see in tax abatement might be 100% for the first 5 years to help with cash flow. We know those are the hardest years when a project's trying to stabilize, meet their minimum coverage requirements. Then what it's pretty common to see is you can drop it off to, reduce percentage for, say, the next 5 or 10 years to eventually where it's down to zero. A little bit more administrative of that, of what year you were in, but that's probably the most common way we'll see it is trying to taper down that percent so that you get to a blended percent that you're essentially providing to them. And generally that works well with their overall 10 to 15-year cash flow assumptions too of what their debt coverage and their equity returns look like.
In your narrative, your memo, you reference cities' adjusted taxable net tax capacity. I'm just not familiar with how do you, our tax capacity is 11 million something, and is it just a percentage of that number?
So when you create a tax abatement, I didn't get into all the restrictions on tax abatements. Like I said, there's a duration limit for the maximum number of years. There's a maximum amount of abatements that cities can participate in, and that's essentially 10% of your 10% of the annual. 10% of the net tax capacity, or 200,000, whichever is greater. City has no abatement, so you have no abatement capacity limits. So those are all the parameters that if you're looking at kind of opportunity costs for participating in projects, there are some communities that run up against what that 10% limit is, and then it becomes a priority of which projects you want to provide assistance to or how you want to finance projects. But in this case, there's no limits there's no limits that the city would be concerned about regarding the statutory authority to use tax abatement. It's really more on the need for the project and the city's willingness to want to participate.
Yeah, I see that we have no issue with meeting that, but I'm just wondering how is that 4,492,252 calculated? What is that, a percentage of the total tax
No,
capacity?
That is, and that that's not related to the tax abatement itself.
No, but it must be related to our tax capacity.
Correct.
Is it a percentage of our total tax capacity?
I think he's just asking like how that 4.4
Yeah.
million was calculated.
Yeah,
I would have to double check that number.
Because our tax capacity is 11 million something, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah, so that,
All right.
yeah.
I just was not familiar with that number. In the covenant for the resolution, it talks about meeting vacancy rate requirements. Do we feel we're going to meet that requirement?
Yeah, I got some information from Scott County CDA, and they'd had obviously our housing study for the area, which is a couple years old now, but then they also had other information that they have from their own units, and yes, we believe we meet that.
So that information is enough information to provide on the Leesburg County side as well?
Correct.
Okay. And I understand you're just planning, or just assumption is just the city doing it. And I only mention Leesburg County because they seem to be starting to be active in EDA types of things. And who knows, they might want to participate in some way. Maybe it's not the abatement part of it. Maybe they would want to, what do you think, Josh?
Sorry, what was that?
Do you think Leesburg County has any interest in participating in this in any way? Or is it worth an ask?
I mean, I can certainly reach out to the county administrator and just get his thoughts on it. I'm not sure whether.
Because obviously they would benefit from it.
Correct.
But when you talk about financial projections, as a city council, are we going to be able to see any, or at least understand any of that work that you've looked at?
If you're referencing two aspects, one, additional details on the calculation of the tax abatement, and you can see kind of the total taxes, the city share, county and school. But we can also share on we'll have to confirm with the developer but if it's regarding details on our financial analysis and kind of the needs analysis, we can certainly, like we said, we did kind of a high-level review of the financial information they shared. There were not specifics on the unit mix, just the overall kind of high level of the total net operating income, operating expenses, debt coverage assumptions tied out to our analysis. But if you're looking for additional details on kind of that financial needs analysis, we can certainly share that as well, as far as, the metrics that we look at from the debt coverage, the return on equity. We look at it from both the with and without the assistance to really try to answer two questions. One, do they need the assistance? And if so, what's the recommended level of assistance? And so that is additional financial review that we would do and would share based on the analysis and the results.
Who pays that, the city, or does the developer pay that fee?
Typically, the developer, in both correct me if I'm wrong, but typically the way we structure it is that there's an application fee, developer pays, and then typically the cost related to establishment of whether it's a tax increment or tax abatement area, I think is typically covered by the developer, or at least negotiated in
That's how we
terms
have
of the
done it.
agreement.
So you're working for the developer essentially when you put this process together?
No. As a city's municipal advisor, we review the developer's information, and our client is the city. But the developer, it's not uncommon, and pretty much in all cases, well, never say all, but in most cases, the developer does provide an application to offset the city's out-of-pocket costs for both financial and legal. Because as related to this agreement is both the financial analysis that we prepare as well as any of the legal documents, whether it's tax abatement agreement or whatever the type of agreement is, there is legal time and cost into that as well. And it's the review of their information. They're covering the city's out-of-pocket costs.
Sean, it'd be very similar. I know we even have it in our fee structure that if for some reason we call a special meeting just for a development project, that the developer will reimburse us the cost of having to call that special meeting.
Yeah, Sean, with all the contracts we had with Chart, every one of them had Chart paying an escrow to cover all your costs.
Oh, they did, okay,
Yes.
all right, okay, thank you.
The construct of the agreement with Minnesota Housing, is that it's unsecured, is that correct? They're not putting a lien on the property, are they?
No, I don't believe though. No, I don't believe there is.
So that if they would.
Because it's actually a deferred 3-year, and then it's deferred completely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Forgiven.
but okay. It depends on the program. Until that time, they do have clawback and typically some requirements if they don't meet them. So it depends on the ultimate agreement. I haven't worked on one of these. I've worked on the side of workforce housing and tax increment, but this is different. It's a dedicated fund, which is a little bit different than a number of the projects that have gone through the last few years. But typically, there is a tieback in some form. They're not getting a mortgage in the same way you normally would do. But if they don't perform in certain capacities, there is an ability to get monies back at that point, up until the time that the deferred or forgivable loan status is active.
And that's why I'm just kind of trying to explore, is there anything that they would do as far as their collection activities that would interfere us in any way from our?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Tax or payment.
possible, and typically on any types of development funding you are not taking a first priority on any of these. The reality is, it still leaves the abatement subject to compliance with any terms and conditions we have with that, so if they don't perform, they don't get the abatement typically.
So I guess that was my next question.
Yeah.
Are we putting together a formal, separate abatement agreement then?
I'm assuming we would have a separate abatement agreement. You're gonna have a specific document tied to this program, which you've got.
Yeah, they're calling it
language in there.
it's Exhibit A to the resolution is just the draft, we'll just call it template, and that's what,
Yep.
even if we move forward to the resolution, you wouldn't actually have this filled in yet at this point. When I talked to MHFA staff, they said, no, that would actually come at a later date. We just want to have the council say, that's the form and we're okay with that. All the specifics would come later.
I thought that form was dealing with the Minnesota Housing end of it.
There'd be two separate agreements.
There'd be a separate one.
There'd be
Okay.
one, the developer agreement, with Minnesota Housing Deferred Loan Agreement. There'd be a tax abatement agreement between the city and the developer that would include all the terms of the tax abatement, including what were the eligible expenses, what the repayment term would be, any of the other provisions that the city wanted to include there. So it would be a separate agreement, but they would talk to each, or this one could acknowledge that there's other funding to the program. That's typically how we structure it.
They'd be interrelated and tied together, and if one goes wrong, the other one has an impact as well.
And as far as the funding of it, then it can go to any purpose. It doesn't have to go to infrastructure or dirt work or,
The tax abatement or the Minnesota housing?
well, tax abatement's gonna go just into their pot, or it's not gonna be paid. But the initial money from Minnesota Housing, that can go into
It can
anything.
be used for land acquisition, it could be to offset our whack and sack fees,
Okay.
yeah.
It does have a line in here for the use of the program funds, but I think it's pretty, as long as it's related to the qualifying project, meaning the market rate, or the workforce market rate residential property.
And then we do have an answer that the abatement would qualify as a matching then?
Yes,
It does? Okay.
that's all very interesting and I know it's unique that we're bringing this forward and really, we're only looking for the application, 2 weeks from now to be submitted. And then all these agreements would have to be put in place, including like all the due diligence and the public hearing for the tax payment at a later date. So you're committing, but you're not, having the final information on everything at this point. So it is
You're kind of
kind of
committing
unique.
interest.
Yes, trying to gauge interest.
You're taking an initial step, and a lot of agreements will follow that you still have control and approval over.
Those are all my questions, at least for now, but I reserve the right to ask. Thank you, Kayla.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? With that, I would take a motion to approve the resolution. That was-
Nope,
Nope.
not looking for any
Oh,
approval.
what the heck?
But we're
just
looking
taking
for
it-
Saw the
a
resolution.
general-
Positive
is-
positive attitudes.
Positive attitudes? Okay.
Consensus of the council that you want staff to continue to work on this.
Okay.
I'll say yes, I have a lot of questions.
But at
Yes.
what level
Yeah.
of funding, and can you give us any direction on that?
So you're asking for a dollar amount tonight.
A dollar or percentage or like, and I don't know if, like I said, we don't need
I think that's
concrete, like,
preliminary.
we definitely want it to be 28,423.
We just need to, so we can work towards something to bring back to you at the next meeting.
So like the 50-50 match?
Yeah.
Instead of
I
100%
was gonna
match.
say, instead of
50.
100%, would the council say, yeah, we all kind of would land around 50% or 75%?
I'm not sure you really need it, but you need to have some flexibility on what the percentage will be based on what Michaela works out and what Ken
Yeah.
works out. It's really to get the step, to get an application in. You're successful, it comes back. You guys run the numbers and figure out what works or doesn't work, because the developer's gonna say it either works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
So can we say up to 100%?
Yes.
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 I would say whatever you can live with, because if they apply with that amount, and we do the due diligence, say it's less, that's great, but if you do the due diligence and say they need it, some other project costs went up, or they can't do number of units, then it is up to that amount that you are agreeing to, with the idea that we'll try to reduce it.
Sort of like what we do with our budgets. Set the higher amount.
Yeah,
Yep, the tax levy.
Well, I support the 100% up to the 15 years. At this point in time, I do think that we can certainly make the case that of our shortage in housing, and we can see our housing permits just not happening. And we don't see, at least I don't see, a big increase in housing permits in the next year or two either. And our residential lot inventory is so low that even if we had a new development, it's not gonna happen that quickly.
Correct.
So, and you can see it in the school district with enrollment declining, so.
And their support letter actually referenced that exact issue, that
So-
this would help not only employees, but families potentially that would have another option.
So it would be revenue for the school district, because they're
Would
not
be.
part of this, it's coming off the taxpayer.
Unless they want to participate, we can ask them too.
Yeah.
They did, by the way, participate in the chart, which is pretty
did.
unusual.
Okay.
When we did that deal. We've never had the school in my history participate before, but
I think for Scott County, I think that was, I don't know if it was the first one, but they said it was very unusual.
yeah.
They still don't like to.
Yeah.
question, maybe,
Yeah.
let's assume that the county and the school district both want to participate on some level, does that reduce the amount that we would need to give, or does that just potentially increase the award that they would receive? Does that make sense?
I think I'd want to confirm that, but my first thought is it would reduce, I mean, at the very least, if the developer's looking for cash flow and everyone chose to participate, at the very least, it would be the same amount they would receive, the developer, but it would all be, if they all participated.
If everyone produced equally, we'd all participate a third instead
Yep.
of 100%?
Right.
Okay.
So some reduced amount, which would still get them to the amount. So I think we should clarify that local match means the entire, but I would assume it would, because if you did a TIF, it'd be the same local match. So I think and that might be kind of the spin-off soft recommendation is reach out to the other entities and see their level, and then, if that would adjust any of the language.
But it still costs the taxpayers
I mean,
money that's gonna go to a developer, essentially.
Yes,
Yeah,
somebody else.
but money for the development, if you don't get the development, you're not getting any of that.
Right.
Right, right. Well, I am in support of up to 100% as well.
I can go with that since it's preliminary and we'll still have
Yeah, it's
A lot of
preliminary.
questions.
If we don't look at it, we'll never know,
okay.
you know, so,
I agree.
Okay.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be back in 2 weeks.
And then, so now, the next item up on the agenda is, talking about the, bonds for the street project for 2024. So, it's you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Doug Green with Baker Tilly. Pleasure to be here. This evening, the resolution in front of you is a resolution authorizing the sale of the bonds. It's not it's not something that's laid out in state statutes that we have to go through this step. It's just good practice to just make sure we're all on the same page. That's basically it. So we're looking to set the sale on May 6th. In your packet that Robin provided, she laid out, which you're probably very familiar with, the projects that we are going to finance in the estimated par amount of $4,745,000. And on the second page of that memo, we laid out the various repayment sources, and there's, as there typically is with improvement bonds, when we're replacing street and utilities, there's quite a number of repayment sources. So there's a levy portion, looking at around $85,000 per year. The assessment revenue is decreasing over time because we assess with level principal, decreasing payments. I'll get to the equipment portion in a second, sticking with the street projects. The water's around $78,000 per year, sanitary sewers around $70,000 per year, and storm is around $40,000 per year. Looking at, in the current interest rate environment, looking at a true interest rate of around 3.6%. You know, I wouldn't expect that to change that much over the next month. It certainly could. But with a project of this size, even if we change, you know, a 0.25%, you know, up or down, it's going to hurt or help a little bit, but it's not going to really fundamentally change what the repayment, what those amounts are. So over the next month, we'll finalize the preliminary official statement. It's the offering document that we send out to put out in the street, and potential buyers will look at it and decide if they want to submit bids for it. We'll prepare for a credit rating call, I believe sometime around April 23rd or so. We'll get that back the next week. I expect it to go well. And then on the morning of May 6th, we'll take bids and then bring them to your consideration that evening.
Okay. I hope that we can get it lower than that 3.6%. I can only cross our fingers.
Just gonna confirm the street levy dollar amount, that's the general, what's coming out of our general fund then, is that correct, Josh? Okay.
Yes, and the equipment levy is then for the
Right.
golf carts, that would be charged back.
Right. And you see, if you're looking at the repayment sources on the second page of that memo, you can see that we are able to amortize them at different time periods. So they're amortized over 5 years. I'm looking at around 40,000 per year for that.
Okay, any questions? Otherwise, I'd look for somebody to offer the motion to authorize the resolution.
I'll make a motion that we approve resolution 24-04-01-01, providing for the issuance and sale of general obligation bonds series 2024A in the proposed aggregate principal amount of $4,745,000.
And I'll second.
And Maggie seconds it. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is general business, the police department policy manual update.
So I
Is
have
that-
one question.
Okay,
Yeah. How long did it take everyone to read the 600 some odd pages?
I told you I read it all, I'd be lying. So,
I did a lot of scanning.
yeah, I about fell over with the 700, or the whole packet was 700 and some pages.
I thought we were gonna go through it page by page.
Go ahead, you start,
I
and
think we'd be best served if I read it page by page. Is that,
Maybe you could give us some of the highlights.
no,
Stuff that changed.
there isn't a lot of changes. What this policy does is, in looking at our current policy, right now, it hasn't been updated in many, many years. So a lot of our policy was more procedure than it was policy. So what this does is take out a lot of the procedure things, a lot of the mandated state and federal requirements, and applies these to essentially what we do every day, in every capacity that we do it. So part of Lexipol is they're always monitoring legislation updates as they come out throughout the year and every legislative session, and then they're applying those updates, and as things change, we get notified, so we can kind of update our policies real time rather than trying to go through and try to keep up with that. So a lot of really good resources. It covers all of our mandates, all the state and federal mandates that we're required to do, along with our post license and certifications. Everything that we're required to do is included in Lexipol. They also have, they're called daily training bulletins. So part of that is officers are given one of these to do almost daily. So they're reviewing some part of the policy on a daily basis to keep things, because not everybody goes through and reads the policy every year. So this gives you a different aspect of the policy weekly and almost daily. And then it asks you, you'll read through a small section and you'll answer 1 or 2 questions about that policy, and then you can move on. A lot of agencies are going to this. I know that Scott's office has worked with several agencies in reviewing, and we did have, our city attorney's office did review this. I worked with Scott and his staff to make sure that we were in alignment with what needs to be in there and what should be in there. So I'm excited to do this. As you alluded to earlier, almost 700 pages or whatever it is. It was a lot of work, right? Going from ground zero here and kind of going through everything that we do, and it took some time to do, but I'm glad that we're where we are right now. Even from the risk management standpoint, this, gives us our protection from the city standpoint that we're doing things the right way.
And
So,
is each officer then have access to this policy?
Yes.
Most likely online or?
yep,
Okay.
yep. And what we'll do is you start to roll this out kind of incrementally. So you're not going to throw 700 pages at them and expect them to. So it kind of comes out in sections for them to review, and then the next section, the next section, the next section. So I think over the next couple of months, we can get it incremented and out to the staff and have a good grasp on it. Another one of the new mandates with the state is that we're required to post a certain, the post-mandated policies on our website. So I will talk to our staff about this and city staff as well, but many agencies are publishing their entire policy manual right on their website just as a form of transparency. And I'm not opposed to doing that at all because there's really nothing that we have in here, we have nothing to hide. So it's, if somebody has a question about what we do or why we did it, they can go right to our website and look at our policy. And it's right there for everyone to have access to. So that would be another benefit to having this implemented with our city here, so.
So we do belong to Lexapro right now,
We do,
but we just haven't probably utilized or.
correct.
So does Lexipol provide the basic boilerplate policy areas and then we fill it in?
When they started, what they did is we did the package where they took our current policy and they took their boilerplate, to do that, and they kind of blended them into what we currently have and what is best practice and blended those with state, federal law. So what we have here is kind of a combination of the two, knowing that some of the things that we had were outdated and got removed, and a lot of those were procedural based rather than policy based. So we have everything now that it's boilerplate and specific to what we do.
I can't imagine any city staff our size being able to be in fully compliance with creating a policy without support. So are we relying on them to assure compliance with all state rules? Are we relying on that attorney over here to do that, or what?
Yeah, it would be a combination of both.
It's a combination of the post board where you used to get most of your policies out of as well, at the state level. So it's a multifaceted approach. The League of Cities is also looking at this and providing guidance as well that we use. You'll get certain policies that have more implications, like pursuit policies that change quicker with a court case coming down. That's when Tim relies on us or the league or, this group as well to say, we've got to tweak this, that, or the other. So yeah, it's a multifaceted approach.
Well, it sounds great. I'm just, when different hands are in the pot, I just want to make sure that as a council, we can be assured that someone has, as of today, we're in compliance with all the state and federal regulations.
And that's the best practice to try to do that. But keep in mind, even with the policies in our police department size, you've got some police departments with 2 officers and 1 chief, and they still have to go through this whole process as well. So,
Right.
It's a team approach. It's not absolutely perfect, but I think we're in a very good position right now where we're at and what was done and the review that was done. I think Tim has put together a good policy.
So you're involved in it. So a year from now, can we be assured that Lexipol is still keeping us in compliance, or do we have to kind of gather the wagons again and kind of look at it?
No, as legislation changes, they have a team of attorneys that this is all they do is review legislation on a daily basis. So as court cases come out, as Scott mentioned, and new legislation comes out, they are reviewing that and implementing that into their policies. So we'll get a notification if a legislation change is made. And then it is sent to us with the change, and it shows our current policy, and it shows the change in the policy, and we can either accept or deny that as part of our policy manual then. And if it's a state mandate or a federal mandate, we're obviously going to accept that change to be in compliance with state and federal law.
So what if you said no and you don't?
And Scott would
Yeah,
Scott
I'd
would
say
fire
that's not a
me,
good
so.
idea, and so would our insurer, League of Cities. 'Cause
No,
League of
as
Cities
a
does
city
the exact
council,
same
how would
thing.
we know that happened?
Uh,
Or how do we?
You've got good staff to rely on who's saying and bringing those things to you. Could there be a situation where this is not caught, the league doesn't catch it? That's possible, but that's why you have insurance as well to deal with certain aspects and make sure you have coverage. The reality is the best practice is to keep this as updated as possible, consistent with state, federal law, and all the court cases, and that's the service you're paying for at this point in time. Plus, you've got the league doing the same thing on the insurance side.
So there's no need in the future for us to have someone audit it to make sure we're in compliance?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
In the past, there may have not been as good of a process that I think we have in place now, it's much better than, say, 20 years ago, where you literally were getting post-board sample policies, and cities would put them together as your police policies. That's not what you're doing anymore. You've got a much more robust system to cover this.
Well, thank you for all the work that you've done to put it together.
Okay, so do you need approval?
Yeah, I would just look for approval to move forward with implementing this with the police
Just a
support.
clerical thing, the word model is used a lot here, and I'm assuming that's the boilerplate from the software, but these are no longer model documents, are they? They should be adopted.
Now, you're adopting them en masse. It's no different than adopting an administrative policy. We'll have to decide whether you remove model or not, but it is a model policy that we're starting with that you are adopting, so I don't see any problem with the language having that in there at this point.
Okay.
That's typical of what other policies would have had in the past as well.
Yeah, I normally see that from a software provider, it says fill in the blank, here's a model document
Yeah.
to use.
Yeah, and sometimes they refer to it still as the model because it is a model policy that's based on both state and federal law. So I'd have to look at what specifically you're looking at, but right now, this is ready for you to say we're adopting the police department policies at this point. It's no different than any other administrative policy you would do.
So moved.
Okay, Rick made the motion to accept the policy update. Is there a second? I'll second it. Has been presented in our packets, so, any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. All right, I'll start, we'll go around the horn here. I'll start with you, Chief Rinda. Nothing? Matt? Tim? Okay. Robin? Ken?
Nothing more?
Okay. Scott?
Just for the next meeting.
Yep, okay. And what about you?
I think so.
Okay. Maggie?
I do not have anything.
Sean?
I'm gonna say no, cause we're batting 1,000. I can't believe it.
Bruce has his pen out. It's settling.
Got his yellow pack.
We're not gonna make it around the hot corner, I can see that.
I don't have anything right now.
I'm sorry, I have a couple of questions. I just, curious, is the city center area, the parcel gonna be used as staging area again for the street improvements? It's not gonna be used this year for that? Okay. And then, this just came at me with this, the police policy, but it refers to water lines. And our water line, the city responsibility, I understood it kind of changed. It's only to the right of way now, isn't it? Water line.
Water services have been approved to the house now. Last year.
From the main to the house, right?
From the main to the house. It used to be from the main to the road right or curb box.
That the city's responsible for?
That's what it used to be. Now it's the utilities is responsible from the main all the way to the house now, into the house. Foundation.
Okay.
That was about, what, a year and a half ago?
Yeah, we approved that.
Bruce brought that to you guys about a year and a half ago.
Well, I know it changed. I just couldn't remember the detail of it. But in the police policy, it talks about broken water lines. I'm not sure that may be consistent with what we're actually doing, but I found it interesting you had in the police policy, but that's all I have.
I got nothing.
Okay. All right, I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
There's been motion second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Now we got a special meeting after this.
Bruce,
So.